Hey, welcome back to Jigsaw's Top 10. Today's our list is the top 10 most influential horror films. Not necessarily the best, but those that gave something special to horror that kind of pushed the genre along. So before we get started, be sure to like, subscribe, and send this out to all your friends if they like horror. And we are going to get started with Jigsaw's Top 10 Most Influential Horror Films. At number 10, Haunted Castle by George Méliès. If you know anything about old silent films, you probably know some George Méliès films. The rocket shoots into the moon's eye, that thing. Well, this was the first horror film in 1897, I want to say. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but this was the first horror film in the 1800s called The Haunted Castle. Not the greatest film, but this is what started it all. At number 9, we have the Universal classic Phantom of the Opera. I was trying to choose between this or the great Lon Chaney's other film, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, but that was a little bit more dramatic as opposed to horror. What makes this film very influential is this is when Universal found out, and most of the rest of America as well, that horror could be a viable way of making money. That the American public, especially right there, just coming into the whole Depression era, leaving World War I, just before World War II. And so horror kind of took hold and showed Universal and others, later on MGM, which is coming up here very close, that horror could make a company money. So Phantom of the Opera. At number 8, we have Freaks. Todd Browning's movie Freaks. Now this was where we really started getting over the top horror. It is a really good movie, but it also was very controversial in the day, and it's still today pretty controversial to some people because of the use of people with actual oddities and kind of the exploitation behind it. But this is Todd Browning's masterpiece. He would later go on to do another really strong movie, Dracula, which started off the whole Universal, not Warner Brothers. I don't know why I say Warner Brothers or Universal. But Tom Browning really took off with the Universal horror because of Dracula. But before that, he did Freaks. At number 7, we have the Herschel Gordon Lewis classic Blood Feast. Nobody can blame Herschel Gordon Lewis for making a good film, but he was the one that started gore. And Blood Feast was the film that did that with the great tongue scene, was what started it, and there would be no gore if it wasn't for Herschel Gordon Lewis' Blood Feast. At number 6, we have Psycho, Alfred Hitchcock's classic Psycho. There's nothing I could say about Psycho that most people don't already know. It changed cinema forever. At number 5, we go back to the Silent Age with the German expressionism film Nosferatu. This was still to this day seen as one of the most scariest films of all time, and for good reason. This is where we get a lot of the dark shadow. The German expressionism brought in that dark, shadowy, creepy feeling, and it today holds up so very well. Now, number 4, I was torn, but I'm going to go with Halloween, because Halloween is kind of the predecessor to a lot of the horror films of today, and this kind of, there's another film later on at number 1, actually, that's the true father of modern day horror, but Halloween gets a lot of its credit, even though a lot of the credit that it takes is really to my number 1, but Halloween is quite good, and of course a classic, and will hold up forever and ever. At number 3, we have American Werewolf in London. Now, I know what you're saying. Before you say it, how does American Werewolf in London, even though it's a good film, how is it very up there at number 3 as one of the most influential? Because it created the special effects genre more than any other. It rationalized it. It allowed it to be seen by a broader audience as something that was viable, because it won an Oscar for special effects. And nobody can take that away from American Werewolf in London at number 3. At number 2, we have Night of the Living Dead, George Romero's classic from the 60s. This not only spawned a vast number of zombie films, but it also was very groundbreaking at the time for the amount of violence it had, for the amount of gore, for the just the idea of the zombie. Before that, it was kind of always some Haitian mind-controlled monster type. But now we are what we currently know as a zombie, not to mention the fact that the lead actor was an African American who in that day and age in the 60s was very unheard of, if heard of at all. Alright, before we get to number 1, here are 3 honorable mentions I would throw out there. One is Friday the 13th, because it took the gore that Herschel had in the 60s and put it with films like what John Carpenter had with Halloween, and stepped it up a notch to the great gore. Another honorable mention is The Shining, the adaptation from Stephen King. This allowed horror to not be just what we consider horror, but it became mental thrillers. So it would spawn things like films like Silence of the Lambs, more mental thrillers, but still have that undertone of 100% horror. And Scream, even though it's not groundbreaking, what it did was allowed us to go, okay, here's all the tropes, here's all the stereotypes of horror film, and we're going to say we know them, we see them here, right here, and we're going to play on those. And nowadays, it's very common to see a film that takes the old horror tropes and exploits them, but in this was probably one of the first films to actually do that. Which leads us to our number 1 most influential horror film. Now, as I said earlier, Halloween gets a lot of the credit for a lot of the stuff that we think of horror, modern day horror, but this was the film that did it. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You have a final female? TCM did it first. You have a group of kids going around and getting picked off one at a time? TCM. You got the crazy old man at the beginning warning everybody? TCM. Most of what we know of modern horror came from this film. 1974, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And it still, today, is one of the greatest films of all time. So, that's my list of the top 10. I'm sure that I've irritated a few people by leaving off certain things, like Exorcist, of course. A lot of people are going to want up there, but these are what I feel were the most influential. Yes, there are more films that are influential, and maybe if you want, I can do a second top 10, but these were my top 10 most influential horror films of all time. I am the Jigsaw. Be sure to remember to like, subscribe, and send this out to all your friends, and until next time, I'm the Jigsaw, and we will see you next time.